Hi, Crime Junkies. I'm your host, Ashley Flowers.
And I'm Brit.
And this is our new friend who literally just came to me from a shelter in South Texas at 5 a.m. So my lovely new little girl doesn't even have a name yet. Feel free to drop suggestions in the comments. This is our new Audio Chuck pup. We love her. She came from a shelter called Who Saved Who, if you want to make a little donation in the name of our old friend Chuck. But she's already bringing a lot of healing to my heart and to the office.
Mm-hmm.
And so she seems pretty chill. Again, I'm only 2 hours into this new form of motherhood. And if she is, I think you'll be seeing her on a lot more recordings. So with that, I think we should just jump into today's story.
Yeah.
The story I have for you today, truly mysterious disappearance of a 23-year-old woman from southeastern Pennsylvania. And if you just skim the headlines, you would think police have had a strong suspect for decades. A twice convicted killer who actually knew our victim. However, we got our hands on this woman's diary, and she wrote of not one, but two love triangles that might actually lead to a break in this case. This is the story of Dawn Mozino. One day in June 1989, a woman in the Philly suburbs named Kathy sees a report of a missing young woman. And Kathy studies the picture of a girl with curly brown hair, and something about her is so familiar. Her name is Dawn Mozino, and apparently, per this report, she's been missing since May 22nd. Dawn's last known to have clocked out of her shift at Bryn Mawr Hospital, where she serves food to patients. And it would have been sometime at around 3 or 4 p.m. that day. And Kathy can't believe what she's seeing, because never in a million years does anyone expect that they might have information on a case, right? She doesn't know Dawn at all, but she does remember seeing a girl who looked just like her at a bus stop near the hospital a few weeks ago. At the time, she was driving her two boys home from school, and one of them actually pointed to this group of women waiting for the bus who were all dressed the same: gray skirts, maroon vests, and a black bow tie. And that is actually one of the hospital's uniforms. And here is the kicker. She specifically remembers seeing Dawn in that group of young women. But Dawn wasn't talking to the other women. She was talking to a man standing nearby. Now, Kathy isn't 100% positive of the date that she saw Dawn, because the days can totally bleed together if you have the same routine, like picking up your boys from school and driving them home. But she doesn't want to risk not giving the information to police, especially if it could be valuable. And she definitely does know it was at least around May 22nd. So she tells police about seeing Dawn, gives them the vague description of a guy that she thinks she was talking to, this black man, maybe in his 30s. Detective Luther Layton, who everyone calls Lucky, is the lead on Dawn's case. And so he wants to ask Kathy if she'll identify him in a photo lineup. And she's like, absolutely.
Wait, how?
Well, because a couple of weeks after Dawn had gone missing, police already had someone on their radar. Through their investigation, they came to realize that in Dawn's address book, there was an entry that said Tom Hawkins with a number beside it. Now, his full name was Thomas Hawkins Jr., and Thomas Hawkins Jr. is a convicted murderer. 9 years before, he sexually assaulted, stabbed, and strangled a 15-year-old girl named Karen Stubbs. This was in 1980. And Britt, he only served 6 years for that.
6?
I know. It seems like prosecutors couldn't prove premeditation for first-degree murder. That's why they ended up offering him a deal for third degree in exchange for a guilty plea. But still, 6 years is astounding to me. This man is clearly dangerous.
So, okay, did Dawn just run into this guy once, or did she, know him?
She knew him. I mean, at least that's what her mom said. They actually worked together 3 or 4 years before at a local rehabilitation center. And what's wild is when they worked together, this dude bullied her. One day, Dawn's sister Kath had to come pick Dawn up from work because, quote, someone was being nasty to her. Turns out it was this guy. After this, Kath went and gave Hawkins a piece of her mind. And then shortly after, Dawn left that job to go work at the hospital. So before this witness, Kathy, even called the police, they had already brought Hawkins in. And his story was weird because he says that 2 months before Dawn went missing, she had offered to help him get a job at the hospital she worked at.
Him, the guy who bullied her at their last job together.
Yeah, he says that Dawn had even set up an interview for him on May 12th, which would have been 10 days before she goes missing. But he says that he never actually showed up for that interview and that Dawn was really angry with him about it. But other than that, when they talked to him, he's like, listen, I have not seen or heard from her since that whole thing, like, again, weeks before. But guess what? They came to learn that that story was BS. The hospital had no record of an interview even being scheduled for Hawkins.
Why would he even lie about the interview?
Well, that's a good question, right? Like, I'm thinking maybe he was actually near the hospital, like Kathy, the witness, said, and he wanted to have a reason for that if police ever figured it out. But I also don't know because it wasn't even on the same day. So I don't know, like, if you're going to make up a lie, why make up one that's so easy to dispute and also doesn't even make any sense or actually explain anything away?
I mean, I could see him probably trying to, like, distance himself from her and specifically from her on that date because the interview that he missed was 10 days earlier, right?
Maybe. But, like, they didn't know it was a lie at the time, and then they didn't have anything on the guy. So at that time, they had to let him go.
Okay, so this guy is already on the radar when Kathy calls.
Right.
They offer this, like, photo lineup. Does she recognize him?
So she agrees, like, yes, let's do this photo lineup. But by the way, just 3 days after police had originally talked to him about Dawn, but before he comes in for, like, this lineup or whatever, this guy actually committed another murder.
What?
Hawkins sexually assaulted, strangled, and stabbed his niece, Andrea Thomas, with a meat fork and staged the scene to look like a burglary. Now, what is interesting is police did not know that it was him who did this at the time. Like, it ends up taking several months for him to get arrested for that. But I just wanted you to know, like, we're talking about a bad guy here.
Yeah.
A bad guy that Kathy does ID as the one she said was talking to Dawn.
Which, if like that's the guy that she saw, then Dawn probably isn't just a missing person at this point.
No, everyone kind of fears the worst. But honestly, Hawkins or no Hawkins, the worst case scenario was already playing out in the minds of Dawn's family. Because they know it's not like her to just disappear and not contact them. I mean, it took them only hours to report her missing because even though Dawn was 23, she had some learning differences. She actually lived at home with her mom and her sister. Now, she's described as high functioning but developmentally delayed. And her sister Kath told us that because of this, Dawn followed a pretty strict schedule. And if anything changed, she would always let her mom or her sister know. So that day that she went missing, her sister Kath said that Dawn was supposed to come home after work, let the dog out, and then her plan was to either walk the 20 minutes to her boyfriend Dan Kolb's apartment in Wayne, Pennsylvania, or maybe just hop on another bus over there. Now, Dan also had some learning differences, and the two of them had been dating for like 3 years. They were both super dedicated to the Special Olympics. Dawn actually won medals in like all these different events, and the Special Olympics was something that she really took seriously. So when she was going over to his place, the two of them were supposed to be like getting together so that they could go to a practice together down at the local YMCA. But when Kath got home from work early that evening, she noticed that the dog had not been taken out, and there were like half a dozen voicemails from Dan asking why Dawn hadn't met him, why she hadn't come to practice. So all that to say, Dawn's family was adamant that something was wrong when they filed a missing persons report. And police actually heard their concerns. They took the report and then immediately started looking into where she could be, who she could be with, all of that, which is how they wound up at Tom Hawkins. And now that he has been ID'd by their witness, the detective on Dawn's case gets a search warrant for his apartment in Philadelphia. Now, there's nothing they find there that directly ties him to Dawn, but they do seize a stack of detective magazines. And it's interesting because They say that they're all underlined and like dog-eared on articles about new police practices and tactics, stuff like that. So Detective Lucky thinks that maybe this guy was like making notes on how to get away
Studying.
with murders. Right.
Mhm.
Now, fast forward a little bit, they end up connecting Hawkins to the murder of his niece, and he finally gets arrested and taken to trial on that, which only makes everyone more suspicious of him in connection to Dawn's disappearance. So much so that Dawn's family attends every single day of the court hearings because they are fully convinced that Hawkins did something to Dawn, and if police can't get him on that, at least they hope he'll go away and pay for this crime, right? And he'll be off the streets, which he does. The jury convicts Hawkins of first-degree murder, which, like, in my mind, you must have been a terrible study of those magazines, which, by the way, they fully brought up at trial because his DNA and fingerprints were all over the crime scene. And so after the verdict, Hawkins is sentenced to death. And this gives Detective Lucky an idea. He sees this as kind of a unique opportunity. He basically goes to the prosecutor, Bruce Castor, and says, look, I think this is our guy, but I got nothing. Would you be open to taking the death penalty away if he gives us information about Dawn? Like, her family just wants some closure.
Mhm.
And Bruce agrees, which to me, like, this is an offer that even the dumbest criminal would take if they could. Like, if I was facing the death penalty for a case where they had me dead to rights, like, forget appeals. Like, I'd try to be confessing to anything.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's just like a confession they want, right? What they said is they want information. I think they want to know like where she is, what happened. But he says he has no information to give because he had nothing to do with Dawn's disappearance. He's sticking to that. Now, Hawkins, to this day, is still sitting on death row because Pennsylvania's governor put a moratorium on the death penalty. But in all this time, he has never come close to confessing to anything relating to Dawn's disappearance.
You know, it is interesting to me that Dawn's case seems to be so different. And I say seems because I guess we don't really know what happened to her, right? She's never been found. We can't say that it's like not the same MO, but his other two victims, like,
They were found quick, yeah.
found quickly, not even hidden. Like,
And you're right. So I know we don't know what happened to Dawn, but we do know a lot about his other crimes. And what we know is like he knew both of the victims, which is the same for Dawn, right?
Mhm.
And like his first victim, Karen, she lived in the same apartment complex as his parents. And so like they met each other on a few different occasions.
Mhm.
And then obviously Andrea was his niece. We know that he sexually assaulted and killed both of them in their homes and then staged both crime scenes to look
Mhm.
like robberies. And so, like I said, while he knew Dawn, and that piece is the same, her home doesn't appear to be any kind of crime scene.
he didn't, as far as we know, he didn't stage anything.
Yeah,
Like,
honestly, it seems like she never even made it home afterward.
right.
And interestingly, Dawn is about a decade older than his two other victims, which I think could factor in if Hawkins' crimes are sexually motivated toward adolescent girls.
But is that enough to rule him out for Dawn?
Not to Detective Lucky. He is still convinced of Hawkins' guilt. But what if he didn't do it? I mean, I get why they would think that. What are the odds that she knew a now twice convicted killer and he didn't have anything to do with it? But like, what if they were right and wrong? What if a convicted murderer did have something to do with her disappearance, but they were just looking at the wrong one? In 2001, Detective Lucky gets the shock of his career when he reads the front page headline of the Delaware County Daily Times. And it says, "Did Bennett kill Dawn?" Now, per this article that he's seeing for the first time,
The detective.
yes,
Cool.
it's basically saying that a guy in prison named Gerald Bennett had written a letter to the paper confessing to Dawn's murder. And let me preface this by saying, Gerald is the actual worst. He's in prison for strangling his 33-year-old girlfriend, Roxanne Carolyn Leidy, to death, and then sexually assaulting her 13-year-old daughter at knife point for nearly 5 hours right after. And this was in 1999, so like 10 years after Dawn's disappearance. And this, I don't know that I've ever dropped an MFer like on an episode, but this man even self-published a book arguing that he is innocent of the crime. and accusing the 13-year-old, a literal child, of killing her own mother.
Okay, when you said the actual worst, I thought that was hyperbolic, but the actual worst.
Now, in this letter that he writes to the paper, he says that he met Dawn in May of 1989 while he was applying for a job at the hospital where she worked, which is eerily similar to Hawkins' story.
Yeah.
I don't know what to make of that. It seems like just a weird coincidence. Now, there aren't a ton of details in the letter, and even though they clearly didn't reach out to Lucky, the detective, the paper did get Bruce Castor, the prosecutor, responding on record saying, quote, "If Bennett takes authorities to the body, then I will publicly apologize to Tommy Hawkins for indicating that I think he's the killer of Don Mozino."
That's
end quote.
Pretty bold.
Yeah, especially for a guy who would go on to ascend the political ladder. I mean, he eventually became the acting attorney general of Pennsylvania. And it turns out Bruce called this guy's bluff. Gerald isn't able to lead them to Dawn's remains. He can't really even give them any verifiable information on what he says happened. And according to the Philadelphia Inquirer, police determined that he was in an entirely different state when Dawn disappeared.
Then why lie out of the blue like that?
He was looking at life in prison or the death penalty, and I think trying to save his skin by giving false information in a high-profile missing persons case. The judge in Gerald's case called him, quote, "the most dangerous, remorseless, callous defendant I have seen in my 20 years as a judge," unquote.
Which I feel like I can't disagree, but now with Dawn's case, they're back to Hawkins?
Honestly, never really got off him. And again, I get why. But I also, again, ask, what if the obvious thing distracted police from the real thing? What if for all these years, people ignored the one clue that Dawn herself left behind? Her diary. In this diary, which she seems to have started just 3 months before her disappearance, Dawn doesn't mention Hawkins once. She certainly doesn't say anything about Gerald Bennett. What Dawn does write about is cheating on her boyfriend, Dan. From her writings, it seems like Dawn had been getting a little bored in her relationship with Dan. And somehow, while in this unsatisfied state, she meets this guy named Nick Katona. I don't really know how, but she devotes most of the pages of her diary to venting about her complicated feelings for Dan and Nick. We actually have a copy of Dawn's diary, which we're going to put in the fan club app if you want to see it. But Dawn's sister Kath actually read some parts of her diary aloud for us to share.
Wednesday, the 22nd of March, 1989. The day after I saw Nick. I like him so much. The only thing is, I still have feelings for Dan. I love him. The 25th of April, 7:51 p.m. But really, what do? I'm lonely. Dan will never come up here, I know now. He said he will, but I know he won't, and I feel so bad. When he finds out that all this time I've seen Nick, he'll be so angry. Oh well, he won't find out. I'll keep it from him, no problem. As long as he doesn't see this diary. Wow. Look at how many entries I've made. Wowee. Well, I know I would keep on writing. It's not fair, though, to my ulcer, and that's why I'm writing this. I hope my mom comes home soon. I'm so hungry. I only had a small salad and some Coke. Well, I guess I'll go. Tomorrow is another SOB day. Bye.
Did her sister know about Nick?
No one in her family really knew about Nick. I mean, Kath said that they knew who he was. He came to the house a couple of times. She knew Dawn was friends with this guy, but she had no idea that Dawn was involved with him romantically. Here's the catch, though. Police did. They had this diary from the jump, and sometime in the 2010s, so this is after Detective Lucky had retired and this new guy was on Dawn's case, Detective McGuire, he lets Kath see the diary. That's how she found out for the first time.
Wow.
Which I'm sure was so disorienting for her, because for as long as she remembers, she believed the same thing as police, that Hawkins probably did something to her sister. But these writings, I don't know, she sees something more in them. than police clearly do. Like, call it a sister's intuition, whatever. But she saw that Nick was clearly dominating Dawn's thoughts from March 1989 right up until her disappearance in May. And it's clear from her entries that Nick did not treat her very well.
Wednesday, the 12th of April, 1989, 9:38 p.m. Hi. Well, now Nick is on my list. He told me he was going to see me and he didn't call me or stop by. He had done this, I don't know how many times. He stole my heart and now I want it back if he's going to keep on doing this. I mean, I really liked him and so he has to do this all the time. I'm sick of it. Wednesday, the 19th of April, 1989, Nick called me at 9:30 a.m. this morning and told me he was going to call me later, but he, of course, not. It pisses me off so much.
It seems like Dawn would drop everything to be with Nick, and Nick kind of just kept stringing her along, basically like booty calling her. I mean, he's not taking Dawn on wholesome dates. He's taking her to hotels to have sex. So Dawn talks in her diary about how she's getting frustrated. Like, she is clearly infatuated with Nick, but she knows that she shouldn't be treated like this. She also can't stop. There's this moment where Dawn writes that she's listening to the song Every Rose Has Its Thorn by Poison on repeat, which is like a tape she said she bought because it reminded her of Nick, which is like sends me back.
I would say it's such a relatable moment. I mean,
it's like you and I, like, when in middle school, we'd like lay in your guest room and just sing Carol and Don Johnson.
I would say complicated.
So complicated. Yeah. Anyway, so after who knows how long of this, but at least 3 months of entries, she and Nick seem to be on the fritz come May when she disappears.
And police never talked to this Nick guy.
So, no, here's the thing. They did once. Radnor police confirmed to us that they brought Nick in for an interview, but they wouldn't tell us when that was or what was asked or what was answered or not answered.
Or anything.
Yeah, and we tried to get the case file for Dawn's case, but our FOIA was denied because police said that it is an active investigation.
Okay, then what about Dan? Like, did they look at him at all? Like, maybe he found out about Nick, confronted Dawn, things got out of hand.
No, so Dan isn't really considered a suspect at all, like by anyone, including Kath. He has a solid alibi. I mean, there are all those voicemails that he left on Dawn's answering machine. Keep in mind, this is the 80s, so they're either coming from his apartment or payphone.
Landline, yeah.
And then someone at the YMCA confirmed that Dan did attend the Special Olympics practice that night. And Kath told us that she knows Dan really well. He is this really sweet man who, get this, still calls Dawn's mom every single evening for the past 36 years to say goodnight. And the thing that really sticks with me, that I was so surprised by, is he wouldn't even have a motive, because Kath says that to this day, Dan still doesn't know that Dawn was cheating on him. As Kath told us, like, they didn't want to break his heart. And when I heard that, I was like, we're putting this out.
I was going to say, like, should we be saying this right now?
I checked with our reporter and she checked with the family. I was like, listen, like, someone needs to tell him before this episode comes out.
Yeah.
But we talked this up and down with Kath, and she says he doesn't even know what a podcast is. He doesn't have a smartphone. So he is living in a very, like, sheltered bubble. So all this to say that Dan was and is quickly ruled out. Nick, on the other hand, is a different story. After Kath reads her sister's diary, she really pushed police to explore the lead on Nick more. Like, in all this time, things with Hawkins hadn't progressed at all. And it's not like he was going anywhere. So, like, let's just be sure, right? Make sure every other avenue is explored to ensure nothing was missed, and that if Hawkins is still where we end up, like, in the end, so be it.
Yeah, he's right here. We know where he is.
Yeah, but, like, might as well, right? But when she's pushing for this, Detective McGuire drops a bombshell. He tells Kath that Nick had actually taken his life in September 2011, which is before she is now coming to him asking for this. So now they're like, there's nothing we can do.
I mean, that seems like it might be, like, relevant information to have before now.
At the time, they didn't have any details for Kath about the circumstances around or leading up to his death, which, mind you, was over 20 years after Dawn disappeared. But yeah, I mean, to say that Kath didn't have some follow-up questions like that seem to have not been asked, like that's an understatement. And so this, in 2013, is where she kind of becomes at odds with not just police, but her own family a little, because Dawn's mother is still in the Hawkins camp with police. And Kath thinks that they've been so focused on Hawkins that they've been neglecting to follow up on other important leads like this one. So by 2023, Kath ends up working with a former social worker turned civilian criminologist named Clark Williams, who's pretty legit, like he's helped solve some cold cases. And Clark starts his investigation with Dawn's diary and methodically tracks down almost everyone Dawn ever mentions, including Nick's family, since Nick isn't around. And really, he was reaching out to them, most of all, to find out what contributed to Nick's death. And his family told Clark that he was in love with a woman who had a serious illness, and when that woman died, Nick just couldn't go on. They also say, and I find this part real interesting, that he never mentioned anyone named Dawn to them ever.
Okay. I mean, even if Nick didn't want to get into like his sex life with his parents, you're telling me someone you know goes missing.
Yeah.
They're all over the news.
Didn't even mention her as like a friend.
And you don't say anything.
It makes you wonder.
Yeah.
Right? Like, why wouldn't Nick go to the police when his friend goes missing? Like, why not tell your family that your friend is missing? Like, you were clearly like in the same orbit. Like, even if you didn't do anything, like, could you offer information?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't sound like, from the diary at least, Nick was taking the relationship seriously. So maybe he wasn't taking it seriously at all. Like, he didn't think that it mattered. He thought like that little of Dawn.
Maybe. But it also makes me think about the fact that Nick would sometimes randomly like show up at her house unannounced when it was convenient for him. So like, I don't know, maybe he showed up at the hospital or the bus stop and picked her up that day she disappeared. And, you know, because of her strong feelings for Nick, it's possible that Dawn might blow off other plans to hang out with him. And then maybe something happened between them. They got in a fight, or Dawn confronted him about like being a total flake. I mean, all of these are just like, I'm just like spitballing. These are theories. But I mean, as we know, theories that no one even looked into by this point. And it's all speculation. There's nothing to suggest that's what actually happened. But again, we have to speculate because police did not do the legwork that we can actually like cross any of this off. Like, did they search his car? Did they search his place? Did they do anything but talk to him one time, TBD, who knows when?
I mean, did Nick have any kind of record over the years? Anything that would indicate he was capable of doing something to Dawn?
We tried looking it up. So I don't know a whole lot about Nick or who he was in the years after 1989. On his like official record, we found that he got a DUI in 1992, which is 3 years after her disappearance. And then in 1996, Nick's charged with reckless endangerment, simple assault, and terroristic threats. I'm not sure what the story is behind these charges because our attempts to get the records were denied. And Nick's father has passed away. His mother didn't respond to our request for comment. So
We're here.
So actually, I mean, this is a good point to call out. Like, if anyone out there listening knew Nick Katona in Coatesville, PA in 1989, like, would love to hear from you. tips@audiochuck.com. Now, the one problem I have with this Nick angle is motive. I mean, he seemed like a kind of grade A-hole, right? Like, who I wouldn't want my sister to date. But I mean, like, everything we know just kind of makes it seem like you said, he didn't care about Dawn.
Yeah, almost to the point where he wouldn't have done something like this because he didn't care about her enough to act on anything. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know if he had another partner. Like, was he having an affair or like, you know, the way she had a boyfriend? But we don't see any evidence in her diary or anything that Dawn was like threatening him in any way. So it doesn't feel like there's a real reason that he would need her out of the picture. But there was someone else mentioned in Dawn's diary who was having an affair, who Dawn had threatened to expose, and who really needed Dawn to go away. From her writings, it is clear to the criminologist Clark that for the most part, Dawn lived out her life in like this 5-mile radius. She would hang out at the Kmart with a group of friends near Dan's apartment in Wayne, Pennsylvania, and at the local Wawa. Our reporter Jennifer Amell even took a drive with Kath to all the areas that Dawn would frequent. And they traced the route that Dawn would usually take from her house, her short cut through the park, past where Dan lived, and then to Kmart. And this was the hub of her social life. That is where she met her best friend, Carol, who has a similar learning disability. Now, Carol is mentioned in Dawn's diary, and basically what happens is Dawn finds out a few months before her disappearance that Carol is seeing a married man named Hampton. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned about Dawn is that she was quite religious. She grew up Catholic, and she would go to church often and belonged to a few Bible studies. And it's interesting because Dawn never wrote about her own affair with Nick behind Dan's back as something sinful. But Kath thinks that Dawn would have probably viewed Carol's affair with Hampton as something more serious because he was married. So Dawn actually had gone to, per her diary, gone to Hampton's wife and told her about the affair.
Oh, and I can't imagine Carol and Hampton were like thrilled about that.
No, I mean, Dawn probably thinks she's doing the right thing here, but
Right.
yeah, Carol and Hampton are really mad at her for this. So Kath thinks that maybe there was some kind of confrontation about this between Hampton, his wife, and Dawn. But there is no solid evidence of this, and Dawn doesn't write about any specific incident in her diary. We do know, however, that Dawn's very last entry before she disappeared is about this situation. Her last diary entry is on May 17th, 1989. This is 5 days before her disappearance. And Britt, I'm going to have you read it for me.
Well, these few days have been hell with Carol and Hamp. They're getting more in trouble, plus his wife is asking for things I know, which really isn't that much. Other than that, everything is okay. Dan is such a honey. Nick is a bastard. That's all it is. Well, I guess I'm going to go. Talk to you later, Dawn.
So the literal last thing Dawn writes is that Hampton's wife is trying to get more information out of Dawn about her husband's affair. And by the way, it's worth pointing out that Hampton had an apartment right down the road from Dan and the Kmart where we know she hung out. And Hampton is a black man. So if the witness, Kathy, really did see Dawn on the 22nd, and she really was talking to a black man, and it wasn't Hawkins, could it have been Hampton?
Do they ever find out if Dawn got on the bus that day or like talked to any of the people who would have been waiting at the stop at the same time? They were all like in the same hospital uniform.
Yeah.
I assume they knew each other.
We don't really know. So because we don't have the files, all we know is that police did interview the bus driver, like the guy who did that route. He didn't remember seeing Dawn get on, but like, I mean, that's just relying on a guy's memory who sees probably hundreds of people passing each day.
And would Hampton have known where Dawn lived? Because if she did get on the bus and made it to Wayne, like she could have been intercepted before she even gets home.
Here's the thing. I know Carol, who is best friends with Dawn, definitely knew where she lived.
Right.
So she could have told Hampton whether he knew outside of that or not. So yeah, if Dawn made it to Wayne, as she usually would after work, Hampton would know exactly when and where to like bump into her on her walk home. But yeah, to your point, it would have had to have either been at the bus stop, like before she got on, or at the bus stop after she got off, but before she got to her house, because the consensus is she never actually made it back inside her house the day she went missing.
Right, because the dog hasn't been let out,
Right.
the voicemails, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
And did the police ever question Hampton?
So Kath told us that police have spoken to both Carol and Hampton several times over the years, though, by the way, the two have long stopped seeing each other. But she told us that police recently interviewed Hampton and said that they are currently not looking into him any further, but have not officially ruled anyone out. Kath also tells us that Carol's brother is actually a detective in the next town over, so Carol would cooperate with police whenever they wanted to ask questions, but she would always bring her brother with her, and being a good brother and hip to police tactics and sensitive to Carol's disability, her brother has advised her to say like as little as possible, which I understand.
And what about Hampton's wife? Like, we still have another player here. Did they stay together?
I actually want to talk to her more than anyone, since like she's the one trying to get Dawn to give her more information right before she went missing. The thing is, she passed away in 2021. In her obituary, her family said that she was diagnosed with diabetes when she was 9, and it was like she was in and out of nursing homes all her life due to that. And despite Hampton's unfaithfulness, they actually stayed together until her death. And we tried to get a hold of Hampton, of course, but we weren't able to. Kath also told us that over the years, she would run into Carol around town. One time, actually, in the grocery store, Kath turned into the aisle, saw Carol. Carol stopped dead in her tracks, stared at Kath, and then turned around quickly to avoid her. I don't know what Kath makes of this other than it was odd and it's stayed with her. But it was something that she brought up to us, so I just wanted to share. And listen, I think these new lines of inquiry coming from the diary are really interesting. But Clark doesn't want to get tunnel vision, so he's still working on even more different leads. He learned from Dan that he used to work at the Kmart they all hung out at. And apparently there was this guy called Maurice Beale who worked there too and would hang around their group. Dawn knew him, but not super well. But it turns out that Maurice had a long criminal history. From 1990 to 1994, Maurice was convicted of drug possession, criminal conspiracy, and assault. He also had reckless endangerment and false imprisonment charges, but those ended up getting dropped. And then in 2003, he's charged with the most serious crime, sexually abusing his then girlfriend's 8-year-old daughter and stabbing her big sister multiple times when she tried to escape him. Thankfully, big sister survived. Maurice went to court for these charges, but was never convicted because the judge declared a mistrial. And I find this interesting because on the surface, when you look at the victim type, you're like, oh, 8-year-old girl, 20-something woman, very different, right? But I've seen in past cases that a certain type of predator preys on those who they deem weaker or easily manipulated. So you might see the same perp go after the elderly and children and those who are disabled. So what if Maurice thought that he could target Dawn because of her disability and then maybe really underestimated her? I don't know. As of now, Maurice is incarcerated for another assault and harassment charge. We did reach out to him as well, but he hasn't responded. And we also sent a letter to Tom Hawkins in prison, but we didn't hear back from him either. Ultimately, there's no solid evidence tying any of these people to Dawn's disappearance.
So where does that leave the case, Kath, her sister, now?
Well, like I said, the old timers still have their money on Hawkins. And I get why. Because if Kathy's ID really was right and she really saw Hawkins on the 22nd, then he is one of the last, if not the last person to see Dawn alive. Bruce, the prosecutor, even has a framed newspaper clipping of the Hawkins trial with the headline, "Hawkins sentenced to die." So it's not like it's water under the bridge for him. And Bruce told us that he is still convinced to this day that Hawkins abducted and killed Dawn. He is just confidently waiting to be proven right. Now, there is a new detective on Dawn's case now, Detective Brian Bell. And Kath tells us that this guy's finally going down all the rabbit holes that police should have gone down back when this was still fresh in people's minds. And though Detective Bell declined to comment on the record, my impression is that while he respects where the investigation has been, he is also trying to come at this from a very different angle and explore the unexplored, so to speak. And the Mozino family is thrilled to have a detective who is doing the hard work to look at past previous biases. The reality is, it's been 36 years, and the Mozino family still doesn't know where Dawn is. They know nothing more today than the day she stepped out of work and vanished. So they're taking every tip that comes their way, even the ones that might seem far-fetched to some people, like one that came about 2 years ago. That's when Kath was contacted by what's called a remote viewer, which is a person who says they'll psychically find where missing loved ones are located. And listen, Kath was skeptical, but what does she have to lose at this point? Well, this remote viewer zeroed in on one particular park and gave this very detailed description. And Kath thinks that the park that this remote viewer described was an exact match to the one that Dawn would cut through to get to the Kmart or the Wawa, the park that's nestled between the apartment buildings where Dan and Hampton lived. It's also right down the street from the house that Carol lived in.
And did they know anything about this park beforehand?
No. According to Kath, not much. Like, all she says the remote viewer was given was the FBI's VICAP report, which had Dawn's name, picture, height, weight. That's it.
And just to be clear, is the remote viewer saying that Dawn's remains are in this park, or just something happened there? This is like an important part to the case? Like, what?
She thinks that's where her remains are. And listen, I'm in the nothing to lose camp. If we can get a search done in this area, what would it hurt? I mean, the park isn't too big. There's like a playground and a baseball diamond, and it's a highly residential area. There are pockets of dense foliage where human remains could possibly be hidden, but also, like, committing a crime here and not having anyone see or hear anything is pretty far-fetched, unless it was in the middle of the night or it happened somewhere else and maybe she was just disposed of there. Because whatever happened to Dawn, we know had to have happened in the late afternoon. For her part, Kath is a bulldog for her sister's case. She actually contacted us to cover this story, and I'm glad that we can do our small part to bring awareness to Dawn's case. Kath says that she has had this recurring dream. She's driving through this neighborhood in Wayne, just past the park, and there, walking up the hill, is Dawn. Kath pulls the car over, tells her sister to get in, but for some reason, Dawn won't answer, won't even look at her. She just keeps walking up the hill. And then Kath wakes up. If you have any information on the disappearance of Dawn Mozino on May 22nd, 1989, please contact the Radnor Township Police at 610-688-5600. You can find all the source material for this episode on our website, crimejunkiepodcast.com. And if you want to listen to more episodes like this and all of our episodes completely ad-free, be sure to join our fan club. You can also get early access to new episodes every week.
And you can follow us on Instagram at Crime Junkie Podcast.
We will be back next week with a brand new episode and with this pup who will hopefully have a name by then.
Humans are strange creatures. They will throw away a human soul for the oldest and cheapest reason in the book, which is paper money. I tell you, in my years of looking into the eyes of killers, it is almost never about a grand ideology. It is about a quiet and creeping greed that rots a man from the inside out. My name is Joe Kenda, and I spent 21 years hunting people who forgot what it means to be human. Let us travel back to a Wednesday evening in May of the year 2020 in Gilbert, Arizona. The sun is sinking over an ordinary air conditioning business. Inside that building is a man named Nick Cordova. He is 40 years old, a devoted father, and a man who built his life on sweat and a desire to provide for his family. He is on a video telephone call with his young children while his wife Alicia is washing dishes at home. It is a portrait of American peace, and then the peace shatters. The children hear a sudden commotion. Alicia grabs the telephone and hears the sounds of struggle and the horrifying moans of a man in his final moments of life. She races to the office, a mother operating on pure adrenaline and terror, only to find the police, yellow tape, and the nightmare every spouse dreads. Her husband is dead. You look at a crime scene like this, and you have to ask yourself who benefits. You do not look at ghosts, you look at the people left breathing. You look at Dave Sweetman, the business partner of Nick. When the first officer arrives at 511 West Guadalupe Road, he finds the door blocked by the victim, and Dave is peeking through the blinds of a window like a frightened mouse. Dave barely opens the door, hands over a bloody gun by the barrel, and says 2 men in medical masks came in to rob them. He claims he was hit on the head and knocked unconscious. My. Let us examine the words of this man. He claims it was a robbery gone wrong. He claims these phantoms in bright green shirts demanded all his money. He tells the police he gave them everything he had. But when a patrol officer pats him down, the officer finds over $1,000 of cash stuffed into his front pocket. Dave suddenly remembers he only gave the robbers the money from his other pocket. You have to be kidding me. If an armed man demands your life or your money, you do not hold back a reserve fund in your left pocket. A lie is a very fragile thing, and the lie of Dave shatters before the sun even fully sets. But let us dig deeper into the psychology of a man who stands by while his partner takes a bullet. Nick was a good man, a trusting man who saw the best in people, which is a beautiful way to live, but a very dangerous way to do business. Dave was a man with a history of fraud and assault, a man who saw other people merely as stepping stones. In the months leading up to the murder, Dave siphoned $45,000 from the company accounts. When confronted, he brushed it off as a temporary loan. Then, he suggested they take out life insurance policies on each other. Not a small policy, mind you, but an astronomical sum totaling $8 million. I tell you, when a business partner with a history of fraud suddenly develops a keen interest in your mortality, you do not walk away, you run. But Nick stayed because he believed in hard work. The surveillance footage tells a story that words cannot hide. The cameras catch Dave walking to the front door and peeking through the blinds just as a battered, red and silver truck pulls up outside. He goes back into the office, and moments later, two men wearing gloves, construction hard hats, and medical masks walk in. They carry an empty box with a hidden compartment to conceal a weapon. This was not a robbery. Robbers do not coordinate an assassination in broad daylight at an air conditioning office for petty cash. They do not wear bright green shirts to a stealth operation unless they are trying to confuse. Witnesses. This was a targeted execution, carried out by absolute amateurs, but orchestrated by someone who knew the schedule, knew the layout, and knew exactly how much an $8 million payout could change a life. The tragedy here is not just the loss of Nick, a man who loved his family so fiercely that his last conscious moments were spent looking at the faces of his children. The tragedy is the painful and agonizing wait for justice. The police let Dave walk out of that station. They claimed they could not find a paper trail between him and the shooters. The investigation slowed down. Detectives were rotated off the case. And Alicia was left to fight a lonely war against a system that seemed to forget the blood spilled on that office carpet. 5 days after the murder, Dave was already sending text messages to the grieving widow, demanding she sign paperwork to release the insurance money. He even attempted to forge her signature when she refused. A man who will steal $45,000 will lie, and a man who will lie with a dead body in the next room is capable of anything. And then you discover the darkest secret of all, buried deep in the past. 7 years prior to this tragedy, the wife of Dave died under mysterious circumstances. Lightning does not strike the same man twice in such profitable ways unless he is holding up a very tall metal pole in a thunderstorm. The human heart is capable of profound love, much like Alicia fighting every single day for 6 years to keep the memory of her husband alive. But the human mind is also capable of profound darkness, quietly calculating the exact dollar value of a human life. The killers drove away in a dusty truck, and one was even caught on camera at a gas station buying $10 of fuel. But the real evil was already inside the building long before the gunman arrived. We owe it to Nick Cordova and to every victim whose voice was violently stolen to keep looking, to keep digging, and to never let the liars sleep soundly. Because eventually, the truth always finds its way into the light, and when it does, it has no mercy for those who hide in the shadows. Humans are strange creatures. They kill for the most ridiculous reasons you can possibly imagine. Money, pride, jealousy, or sometimes just out of sheer, terrifying need for control. When someone decides they own another human being, the moment that possession tries to walk away is the most dangerous moment of their life. I have investigated hundreds of homicides, and I will tell you this: murder is a secret that cannot be kept, unless the people whose job it is to uncover the truth decide to look the other way. Let us look at the case of Laura Sweetman, a pediatric neurologist, a mother of 3 boys, a woman who dedicated her life to healing the sick. She was a woman of science, of logic, trapped in a highly illogical and deeply dangerous domestic nightmare. In the 1980s, she met David Sweetman. They were the golden couple at their high school in California. She was a swimmer, a high achiever. He was a varsity football player. It sounds like the American dream, does it not? But you have to be careful when you look at a perfect picture, because the frame is usually hiding the rot on the walls. For years, David methodically stripped away her confidence. That is what cowards do. They belittle their partners to make themselves feel 10 feet tall. While Laura was saving lives at the children's hospital, David was running questionable businesses, racking up debts, and allegedly dealing with civil lawsuits. But the financial deceit was only the tip of the iceberg. By April of 2013, Laura discovered David had been living a complete double life. He was having an affair and had fathered a child with another woman, a child who was already of preschool age. You have to be kidding me. That is not a momentary lapse in judgment. That is years of calculated, cold-blooded deception. For Laura, the illusion was finally shattered. The psychology here is textbook. The victim of long-term emotional abuse finally finds the one piece of evidence that breaks the trauma bond. She filed for divorce. She planned her escape meticulously. She rented a house, bought a car, and arranged for the nanny to care for the children, so David would not know her new address. But on April 21st, David ambushed her. She tried to leave, but he took her car keys. She managed to escape and called the authorities, reporting that he had choked her 3 separate times and threatened to kill her. When the police arrived, David played his favorite role, the victim. He claimed he only held her in a close embrace, a hug. My. Since when does a loving embrace result in a woman screaming for help on a 1 hour and 2 minute audio recording? But the justice system, in all its flawed glory, dropped the charges. Insufficient evidence. A woman documents her own assault, and the courts shrugged their shoulders. This was a catastrophic failure that undoubtedly signaled to David that he was untouchable. Laura secured an order of protection, but a piece of paper does not stop a bullet, and it certainly does not stop a predator. She lived in constant fear. She felt hunted. In November, a neighbor noticed a suspicious white vehicle parked in Laura's driveway for hours. The man inside became verbally aggressive when confronted. The neighbor noted the license plate and gave it to the police. Did they track it? Did they interview the driver? No. They filed it away and went to lunch. Sloppy, inexcusable police work. Then comes December 9th, 2013. Laura fails to show up for her shift at the hospital. A dedicated physician does not simply vanish. Her nanny arrives at her rental house. The front door is locked, but the interior dog gate is knocked over, and the back door, a door Laura religiously locked every single night, is wide open. Upstairs, Laura is found completely unresponsive in her bathtub, naked, foaming at the mouth, dead. Rigor mortis had fully set in, placing her time of death between 9 in the evening the previous night and 3 in the morning. The crime scene is a silent witness, and it was screaming that something was wrong. But the detectives arrive with their eyes wide shut. When they contact David, he begins sobbing uncontrollably before they even tell him his wife is dead. I tell you, an innocent man asks what happened. A guilty man puts on a theatrical performance because he has been rehearsing it all night. David claims he was home with their 3 boys. The police check his mobile phone, which shows it was at his house. A phone is not a person. A phone cannot testify that its owner did not slip out the back door while the children slept. Yet, they never press him. They never ask the hard questions. And what about the other men in Laura's life? She had been trying to move on. She had a date the night before her death with a personal trainer named Will. He admits he was at her house that evening. He admits he deleted their messages immediately after finding out she was dead because he had another girlfriend. He leaves the house at an unknown time, and the police simply take his word for it. They never establish a firm timeline. They never push him for an alibi. They collect his genetic material and do absolutely nothing with it. But the true tragedy of this investigation lies in the morgue. The medical examiner, a man with a documented history of severe professional misconduct, conducts the autopsy. He notes multiple fresh bruises on Laura's head, back, arms, and legs. He notes the foam at her mouth. In any basic forensic manual, foam in the airways combined with body found in water points directly to drowning. It is a result of water mixing with air and natural lung fluids during a desperate struggle to breathe. Does he rule a homicide by drowning? No, he claims there is no definitive evidence of drowning. Instead, he points to a supposed heart attack Laura suffered 2 years prior. A heart attack that, mind you, left absolutely zero scarring or abnormalities on her actual heart tissue. He notes a prescription stimulant was found at the scene. Yet the toxicologist's report shows her blood was completely clean. No drugs, no alcohol, nothing. And who signed that toxicology report? A laboratory director who had a previous criminal conviction for stealing firearms from the police. Evidence room. You cannot make this up. The people entrusted to speak for the dead were fundamentally compromised because of their incompetence, or perhaps their sheer laziness. The cause of death is ruled undetermined. Let us look at the motive. With Laura dead, David avoids a messy divorce. He avoids financial ruin. He gains full custody of the children and potentially a massive life insurance payout. He had the means, the motive, and the opportunity. But because the medical examiner refused to call a homicide, the police department used that undetermined ruling as an excuse to close the book. For months later, the case was marked inactive. Laura Sweetman did not just die. She was erased. She was a victim of a deeply manipulative man who sought to control her every breath. And when she finally broke free, she was punished for it. She was then victimized a second time by an apathetic police department and a deeply flawed medical examiner's office. The psychology of this crime is not complicated. It is the ultimate expression of ownership. If I cannot have you, no one will. The truth is buried in that unexamined evidence. It is hidden in the dark timeline of that Sunday night. The neighbor who saw the car, the men she was dating, the manipulative husband who shed fake tears on his driveway. Murder leave a trail, always, but you have to be willing to open your eyes and look at it. Until someone in that department decides to do the job they swore an oath to do, Laura Sweetman will not find peace. I have spent my life speaking for the dead because they cannot speak for themselves. And Laura's silence is deafening. Humans are strange creatures. They kill for the most ridiculous reasons you can possibly imagine, and sometimes they kill for reasons that exist only in the dark, twisted corridors of their own minds. I tell you, in my years working homicide, I have seen the devil walk among us, usually wearing the face of an ordinary man. We are traveling back to the summer of 1969, a time when the world was changing rapidly, but the fundamental nature of evil remained exactly the same. Our victim is a young woman named Stephanie Casper. She was just a teenager, only days away from celebrating her 18th birthday on July 11th. Stephanie was everything you would want your daughter to be. She was hardworking. She was kind. She looked out for the younger kids in her neighborhood. And she was eager to step out into the world and build a life of her own. She had just graduated high school and took a job waitressing at a busy restaurant in downtown. Milwaukee called Mark's Big Boy. She was young, vibrant, and possessed that innocent desire for independence that is the absolute right of every young person. But out there in the dark, a shadow was waiting. The human animal is a predator, and this predator was patient. Stephanie had a secret. She was seriously dating a 22-year-old serviceman named John, a relationship she kept hidden from her parents out of fear they would not approve. The psychology of a young woman keeping a secret like that is heavy. It isolates her, makes her vulnerable because she is already operating in the shadows to protect the person she cares about. On Sunday, July 6, 1969, Stephanie finished her late shift. She was supposed to be picked up by John, but he had fallen asleep. She was angry, as any young woman would be, and she walked out of the restaurant alone into the Milwaukee night around 12:30 in the morning. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. You have to be kidding me. A young girl, alone, angry, walking the city streets. It is a recipe for tragedy. The predator saw an opportunity. Whether it was someone she knew or a complete stranger offering a ride, the trap was set. The mind of a killer in this moment is devoid of empathy. They do not see a girl with a family, a girl with dreams. They see an object to be consumed. When Wednesday, July 9th arrived, the overcast, drizzly afternoon brought a horrifying discovery in Racine County, near an old, condemned steel trestle bridge on 8 Mile Road. A 10-year-old boy out fishing with his family found remains scattered along the riverbank of Route River. The killer had wrapped parts of Stephanie in brown paper bags and issues of the Milwaukee Sentinel, dated June 24th. There were cigarette butts pressed into the paper folds, burned matches, a lone brown leather shoe, and a discarded military-style jacket a few feet away. But the absolute cowardice of this phantom is revealed in what the pathologist found: precise, methodical cuts, a severed artery in her neck. The dismemberment happened after she was already dead. This tells me we are dealing with a man who had time, privacy, and a cold, calculating demeanor. He viewed the aftermath of his crime as a logistical problem to be solved, not a human tragedy. But killers are arrogant, and arrogance breeds stupidity. This man was shedding evidence across the state. In Franklin, miles away from the river, citizens found her gold purse, her blue appointment book, her Social Security card, and torn photo booth pictures scattered along a rural road. This geographic trail tells a story of a frantic but controlled movement between Milwaukee and Racine County. He was comfortable in the rural backroads. He felt safe there. About 2 weeks later, more remains were found miles away from the river, placed in a weather-beaten white cardboard box in heavy brush near a farmhouse. The killer had made a community's closure. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict. Daphne Wright was found guilty of capital murder. The court sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring she would never again exert influence over others. Bobby Guillory also received a lengthy prison sentence for his role in conspiracy, though some investigators felt a lingering sense of disappointment that Chow Tran did not face criminal charges due to his immunity agreement. They found comfort in the knowledge that the primary instigators had been held accountable. The story of Long, Nguyen, and Hong Lee remained a poignant reminder of the vulnerabilities faced by immigrant families striving for success in a new land. The local Arlington community continued to honor the memory of the gentle couple, remembering them not for the tragedy that took them, but for the warmth, industry, and love they had shared during their journey to fulfill their dreams. The summer sun in Texas does not rise so much as it descends, heavy and golden, pressing the humidity of the Gulf against the flat asphalt of Arlington. At 7 in the morning on the 10th of June, 2012, the air was already thick enough to taste. Chow Tran stood near the curb of the apartment complex, his hands stuffed deep into his pockets. He was 38 years old, his face mapped with the subtle lines of a man who spent his days looking at fabric under the harsh glare of sewing room lights. Behind him stood his wife and his teenage son, their silence heavier than the morning heat. Chow looked at the window of the second-floor apartment. It was open, just a crack, but in this heat, no one left the window open. His father-in-law, Long Nguyen, who was 73, and his mother-in-law, Hong Lu, who was 68, were meticulous people. They did not leave windows open to let the expensive air conditioning escape. They did not ignore the knocking of their grandson. "Go knock again, son," Chow said, his voice barely louder than the hum of the distant interstate. The boy ran up the concrete stairs, his sneakers slapping against the steps. He knocked. He called out in Vietnamese, "Grandpa? Grandma?" There was no sound from within, only the drone of the air conditioning unit from the neighboring apartment. Chow took his phone from his pocket. His hands were shaking, not with the cold, but with a sudden, icy certainty that the world they had built since arriving in America in the year 2000 was about to split along its seams. He dialed the non-emergency number first. Then, with a throat dry as paper, he asked for a welfare check. "Can you give me their names?" the dispatcher asked, her voice calm, a sharp contrast to the rising heat in Chow's chest. "My dad's name is Long," Chow said, spelling out slowly, his English careful and deliberate. "LNG, last name Nguyen, Nguyen. He is 70-something right now. My mother-in-law, Hong Lu." They are not answering. Within 10 minutes, the white and blue patrol car of the Arlington Police Department pulled into the gravel lot. Officer Weller, a veteran patrolman with 14 years on the force, stepped out. He saw the family gathered by the stairs, not the usual scene of a welfare check, were distant. Relative calls from another state, but an entire family unit standing in the driveway, too terrified to cross their own threshold. They saw the window open, Chow told the officer, pointing upward. "Everything inside looks down, fallen down." Weller nodded, his hand resting instinctively near his utility belt. "Stay here," he said. The wooden door of the apartment was unlocked. It yielded to a soft push, swinging open to reveal a living room that looked as though a small, violent storm had passed through it. Compact discs were scattered across the carpet like spilled coins. A small table was overturned. "Arlington Police. Anyone inside?" Weller called out. Silence. He moved through the kitchen. The sink was dry. He checked the bathroom. Empty. The only room remaining was the master bedroom at the end of the short hallway. Weller stepped inside the bedroom. At first glance, it appeared empty. The bed was unmade, the sheets tangled. He turned to leave, his flashlight beam sweeping across the wall near a small closet. He froze. On the drywall, right next to the closet door frame, were dark, smudged handprints. They were not the casual marks of someone leaning against the wall. They were the desperate, sliding prints of someone trying to hold onto the world as they were dragged away. Weller's heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct honed over nearly a decade and a half told him that what lay behind that closet door would change the shape of his day and perhaps his career. He reached out, his fingers wrapping around the brass knob. He pulled it open. Chapter 2, The Calling Card. Inside the small closet, wedged beneath hanging coats that still smelled of traditional Vietnamese mothballs and laundry, detergent, were Long Nguyen and Hong Lu. They were bound hand and foot with heavy silver duct tape, their limbs secure behind them in a cruel, tight binding. Their heads were wrapped entirely in the same silver tape, covering their eyes, their noses, their mouths. Weller did not need to check for pulses. The stillness in the closet was absolute. There was blood on the walls, blood on the floor, and the unmistakable scent of a life violently extinguished. He backed out of the room, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. For a moment, his hand hovered over his radio, but his throat had closed up. He walked all the way back to the living room, standing in the center of the disordered space. Before he could find his voice. "Dispatch! This is Unit 3-4, he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I need a supervisor and a homicide unit at this location. We have a double." Within 45 minutes, the quiet residential street was blocked by yellow tape. Detective Stewart, a 21-year veteran of the Arlington Homicide Squad, arrived with his notepad in hand. He had seen the aftermath of robberies, domestic disputes, and gang warfare, but when he stepped into the bedroom closet, he felt a cold chill despite the 90-degree heat. "This is personal, Stewart muttered to his partner as they stood over the scene. Or it's meant to look that way. The medical examiner would later note that Long's face had been wrapped in 10 feet of duct tape. Hong's face had been wrapped in 25 feet. They had not died from the blunt force trauma to their heads, though there were severe lacerations that suggested the use of a hammer or a small bat. They had died because they could not breathe. As the crime scene technicians began their slow, meticulous work, they discovered several items that seemed out of place. On the coffee table in the living room lay a small plate containing crushed blue pills, arranged as if someone had intended to inhale them. Next to it was a half-burned marijuana cigarette. But the most striking piece of evidence was a glass beer bottle sitting on the kitchen counter. Wrapped around its neck was a light blue bandana knotted tightly. The local gang unit says light blue is the color of one of the active Vietnamese crews in the area. Stewart's partner said, pointing at the bottle, they're known for home invasions, extortion, targeting older immigrants who keep cash in the house. Maybe, Stewart said, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the scattered CDs on the floor. But look at this. They knocked over the CD rack. But they left the television. They left the stereo. They tore up the room. But it looks convenient, like someone wanted us to see a robbery. You think it's staged? I think we don't rule anything out, Stewart said. Let's talk to the family. Chapter 3. The Thread from Houston. Chow Tran sat in the interview room at the Arlington police station. He was the only member of the family whose English was fluent enough to speak without an interpreter. He explained to Detective Stewart how his father-in-law had celebrated his birthday the night before. We had a party, Chow said, his eyes red-rimmed. Everyone was there. We ate. We played cards until 10 o'clock. Then my cousin drove them home. They were happy. They had no enemies. Did they keep money in the house, Chow? Stewart asked. We know many families in the community prefer to keep cash at home rather than in the banks. No, Chow said, shaking his head. We have no money. The business. It has been very bad. He went on to explain that after nearly 10 years of hard work, their commercial sewing business, which once held a prestigious contract with a major entertainment company to sew children's costumes, had lost its primary client in the year 2011. The factory was silent most days. The bills were piling up. In our culture, Chow explained, his voice falling to a whisper, when everything goes wrong at once, we believe there is a curse, a bad spirit. My mother-in-law, she believed this very strongly. She found an advertisement in the Vietnamese newspaper, a woman in Houston, a spiritual advisor. A spiritual advisor? Stewart asked, leaning forward. Yes, her name is Daphne. Daphne Wright. She said she could lift the curse. She said she could bring the good fortune back to our business. Chow described how he and his mother-in-law had driven 250 miles to Houston to meet with Daphne. She lived in a comfortable home, surrounded by the trappings of successful business. She had performed a ritual, burning incense and reciting prayers, promising that the sewing business would soon see a grand revival. But the revival never came. Instead, the debt grew. How much did you pay her, Chow? Chow looked down at his hands, his fingers twisting together. At first, a few thousand, but then she said the curse was very deep. She needed to do more rituals. She said, we could pay her later, on credit, but then the bill became very big. How big? $250,000, Chow whispered. Maybe more. $280,000. Stewart stared at him. $280,000 for spiritual advice? She told us we did not pay, Chow said, his eyes wide with an old, deep-seated terror. The spirits would take everything. She said she would put a curse on us that we could never escape. Chapter 4. The Cold Years. For more than 2 years, the investigation into the murders of Long Nguyen and Hong Lu went cold. The DNA recovered from a marijuana cigarette left at the scene did not match anyone in the national database. The blue bandana led to several dead ends. Local gang members denied any involvement, and their alibis held up under scrutiny. The fingerprints on the beer bottle were smudge-marked and unusable. Chow Tran stopped returning Detective Stewart's phone calls. When the detective tried to visit the family home, he was met by a lawyer who politely but firmly informed him that Chow would no longer speak to the police without representation. He's hiding something, Stewart's partner said as they looked at the whiteboard in the homicide office, where the victim's photos had sat since 2012. But we don't have enough to connect him to the crime scene. His alibi for the night of the murder is solid. He was at his own house with 10 other people. And the business? Stewart asked. Folded, his partner replied. But here's the interesting part. A few months after the murders, Chow and his wife collected on 2 life insurance policies, $1 million total. They bought a new house in a nice neighborhood. They didn't reopen the sewing shop. And Daphne, right? Still in Houston, still advertising in the local papers, still taking clients. The case might have remained on the shelf forever if not for a horse. In October of the year 2015, a young man named Willie Guillory was arrested in Houston for the theft of a horse, a felony offense. In the state of Texas, because it was a felony conviction, the law required Willie, who had just turned 19, to submit a DNA sample to the state database. Within 48 hours of his arrest, a computer in Austin flagged a match. The DNA from the teenager who had stolen a horse in Houston matched the DNA found on the half-burned marijuana cigarette left on the coffee table of Long Nguyen and Hong Lu 3 years earlier. We've got him, Stewart said, grabbing his jacket from the back of his chair. Let's go to Houston. Chapter 5, The Confession of a Nephew. Willie Guillory did not look like a hardened gang member. When Detective Stewart sat across from him in the interrogation room, the 19-year-old was shivering despite his heavy jacket. I was in Arlington, Willie said, his voice high and nervous. I don't know nothing about no old people. Willie, Stewart said, laying a color photograph of the marijuana cigarette on the table. Your DNA is on this. It was found next to 2 people who were beaten and suffocated to death. You were 16 years old when this happened. If you don't talk to us, you're going to face the needle. The young man stared at the photograph. His eyes filled with tears, and he began to shake. It was my uncle, Willie sobbed, burying his face in his hands. My Uncle Bobby. He told me we had to go do a job up in Arlington. He said we were just going to scare some people who owed money to his friend. Willie described how his uncle, Bobby Guillory, had driven them 3 hours north to Arlington on the night of June 9th, 2012. Bobby had a key to the apartment. We went in before they got home, Willie said. Bobby had all this stuff. He had the blue bandana, the beer bottle, the pills. He told me to throw the CDs on the floor, make it look like some gang did it. He told me to smoke some of the weed and leave it there. And when the couple came home, Stewart asked. They walked in, and Bobby jumped them, Willie said, his voice trembling. The lady tried to run, but I grabbed her. Bobby hit the man with a bat. Then he told me to help him tape them up. We put them in the closet. I didn't know they were going to die. Man, I thought we were just leaving them there. Who gave your uncle the key, Willie? Daphne, the boy whispered. The lady in Houston. My uncle went to her office, and she told him these people owed her money. She said if they didn't pay up, she wanted them dead. She gave him $10,000 to do it. Chapter 6, The Shadow of the Mastermind. The arrest of Bobby Guillory took place in Katy, Texas, on a rainy afternoon in December of 2015. Bobby, a 52-year-old man with no prior criminal record, did not offer any resistance. When presented with his nephew's confession, and the search warrant for his own DNA. Bobby broke down. I was so desperate, Bobby said, his tears falling onto the metal table of the interview room. I had been laid off. I didn't want to be on the street. Daphne, she knew I needed the money. She told me it was simple. She gave me the key. She told me exactly how to make it look like a gang. Robbery. Where did Daphne get the key, Bobby? Stewart asked. She got it from the son-in-law. Bobby said, Chow. He's the one who gave it to her. The revelation was like a sudden gust of wind that clears the fog from a dark road. The pieces of the puzzle, scattered for 3 years, fell into place with a terrifying precision. On the 31st of August, 2016, the police executed a search warrant at the home of Daphne Wright in Houston. Inside her office, investigators found a leather-bound ledger. The ledger was a catalog of belief and desperation. It listed dozens of names from the local Vietnamese community, with numbers written next to them. $10,000, $20,000, $40,000. Next to the names of Hong Lu and Chow Tran, the numbers were much larger, reaching nearly $300,000. The prosecution offered Chow Tran a deal. In exchange for his full, honest testimony against Daphne Wright and Bobby Guillory, he would receive immunity from prosecution. We needed the puppet master, the district attorney would later explain. Without Chow's testimony, we couldn't prove that Daphne was the one who ordered the hit. We had to make a deal with the devil to catch the hand that held the strings. During the trial in August of 2019, Chow Tran took the stand. He described how Daphne had used her spiritual influence to dominate his family's life. She told my mother-in-law that the spirits demanded a sacrifice. Chow testified, his voice flat, almost devoid of emotion. She said if we could not pay the debt, my mother-in-law should offer herself so we could collect the insurance money and pay her. My mother-in-law agreed. She wanted to save the family from the curse. The defense attorney pointed at Chow, his voice ringing through the courtroom. You wanted the money. You let these men into your parent home. You gave them the key, and you sat in your house playing cards while they died. I was under her power, Chow whispered. She controlled my mind. The jury did not believe Chow's claims of spiritual control, but their mandate was to judge Daphne Wright. On the 1st of September, 2019, Daphne was found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Bobby Guillory received the same sentence. Willie Guillory, who had cooperated with the state, was sentenced to 20 years. Chow Tran walked out of the courtroom a free man, though he carried a debt that no ledger could ever record. Detective Stewart stood on the steps of the courthouse, watching the summer rain wash over the pavement. It will never sit well with me that Chow is not in prison, Stewart said to his partner as they walked back to their car. But the truth has its own way of catching up. What is done in the dark always finds a light. The morning sun over Arlington, Texas, usually brings a warm, golden glow that promises new beginnings. On the 10th of June, 2012, at exactly 7:29 in the morning, the peaceful silence of the early hours was broken by a call to emergency dispatchers. The voice on the other end belonged to Chow Tran, a 38-year-old Vietnamese immigrant. His tone was a mixture of worry and hesitation as he requested a welfare check on his elderly in-laws, Long Nguyen and Hong Lu. The dispatcher, trying to gather the necessary details, asked for the names of the family members in question. Chow explained that his father-in-law was named Long, spelling it out carefully, and his last name was Nguyen, also spelling it out. He mentioned that his father-in-law was 70-something years old. Chow explained that his son and his wife had gone to the residence to check on them. They had looked through a window and noticed that things inside had fallen down, suggesting that something was terribly wrong. The responding officers were dispatched immediately. Among them was Officer Weller, a dedicated professional who had seen many things in his career, but was unprepared for what lay ahead when he arrived at the apartment complex. he noticed a large group of family members standing outside. It was unusually early for a welfare check, and the sheer number of concerned relatives gathering on the pavement indicated that this was no ordinary Sunday morning. The family explained that they were too terrified to enter the home themselves. They had noticed that a window to the residence was wide open and that the interior appeared in complete disarray. Officer Weller, holding his flashlight, stepped through the entrance to perform his duty. Chapter 2: The Discovery. Upon entering the apartment, the signs of disturbance were immediately clear. The living room was in complete disarray, resembling a burglary. The kitchen and bathroom were empty, leaving only the master bedroom unchecked. Officer Weller walked into the bedroom. At first glance, the room appeared empty, and he began to feel a sense of relief, hoping the elderly couple had simply gone out for an early morning walk. However, as he turned to leave, his flashlight caught hand smudges on the wall next to a very small closet. An instinctual hesitation came over him. Every feeling inside told him that opening that door would change everything, yet his duty required him to check every corner. He slowly opened the closet door. Inside the small space, he discovered the elderly couple. They were hog-tied with duct tape, which also covered their heads and mouths. There was blood indicating a violent struggle. Officer Weller, a veteran with 14 years of experience, was momentarily frozen in shock. He walked out of the bedroom into the middle of the living room, unable to speak or use his radio immediately. Once he gathered his composure, he requested a supervisor and a crime scene unit. Chapter 3: The Investigation Begins. When the Arlington homicide investigators arrived, they were deeply saddened by the scene. Detective Stewart, a veteran with 21 years in homicide, noted that this was one of the most violent scenes he had encountered. The physical evidence suggested the victims had been beaten with a blunt object before being placed in the closet. Initially, the scene suggested a robbery gone wrong. There was evidence of ransacking, with items like compact discs scattered across the floor. However, certain elements seemed unusual for a typical burglary. On the coffee table, investigators found a plate of crushed prescription pills and a marijuana cigarette. Most notably, a light blue bandana was wrapped around a beer bottle, placed almost like a calling card. In Arlington, there were active youth groups and gangs known to use specific colors. The light blue bandana suggested potential gang activity, but the extreme violence against an elderly couple did not align with typical local gang behavior. Long Nguyen and Hong, who had immigrated to the United States from Vietnam in the year 2000, seeking the American dream, they settled in Arlington, a vibrant city in Tarrant County with a supportive and large Vietnamese community. The community had grown significantly since 1975, with many families establishing successful businesses and maintaining their cultural heritage. The couple had started a commercial sewing business, enlisting the help of their son-in-law, Chow, who spoke English well and managed relations with contractors. For nearly a decade, the business thrived, even securing contracts with major corporations, including Disney. However, by 2011, the business faced financial difficulties after losing these key contracts. Chapter 4: Spiritual Searches and Hidden Debts. In times of great difficulty, the family turned to traditional beliefs to seek guidance and find a way forward. In Vietnamese culture, many families hold deep respect for spiritual advisors who offer guidance during major life challenges such as financial distress or family disharmony. Searching through a local Vietnamese newspaper, Chow and his mother-in-law, Hong, found an advertisement for a spiritual advisor located 250 miles away in Houston. The advisor, Daphne Wright, advertised services to remove negative curses and bring good fortune. Hoping to restore their business, Chow contacted Daphne and arranged a meeting at her Houston home. She performed a traditional ritual, giving the family hope that their fortunes would improve. However, as the business continued to struggle, the family became deeply indebted to her. Daphne began providing her services on credit, and over time, the debt ballooned to an amount between $250,000 and $280,000. As the pressure to pay increased, the family found themselves in a difficult position. Chapter 5. Unraveling the Truth. On the 11th of June, 2012, the medical examiner confirmed that the cause of death for both victims was suffocation due to the extensive duct tape wrapped around their faces. This finding confirmed that the perpetrators intended to cause serious harm, ruling out a simple robbery. Shortly after, Detective Stewart received a call from an insurance company. It was revealed that the victims carried life insurance policies totaling $1 million, with Chow Tran named as a beneficiary. When questioned, Chow explained that the policies were intended to ensure the continuity of the family sewing business in the event of a tragedy. He provided a clear alibi, explaining that the family had been celebrating his father-in-law's birthday until late the previous evening. With no immediate matches for the DNA found on the marijuana cigarette at the scene, the case remained unresolved for 3 years. Then, in 2015, a breakthrough occurred. A young man named Willie Guillory was arrested for a felony in Houston because he had reached adulthood and was convicted of felony. His DNA profile was entered into the national database. The system identified a match between Willie's DNA and the evidence recovered from the apartment in 2012. At the time of the offense, Willie was only 16 years old, which is why his profile had not been in the system earlier. Chapter 6. The Confession. When questioned by investigators, Willie became emotional and confessed to his involvement. He explained that his uncle, Bobby Guillory, had asked him to help with a task in Arlington. On the 9th of June, 2012, they made the 3-hour drive from Houston. Willie stated that they had been given a key to the apartment to stage a burglary. They placed the beer bottle, the blue bandana, the pills, and the marijuana cigarette to make it look like a gang-related incident. He explained that once the couple returned home, Bobby confronted them, and they subsequently secured them in a closet. Willie revealed that the entire plan was organized by Daphne Wright, who wanted to collect on the family's debt. He stated that Daphne had told Bobby she wanted the couple gone if the debt was not paid, promising Bobby $10,000 for his assistance. Bobby Guillory was arrested on the 16th of December, 2015. He also confessed, confirming that Daphne was the organizer of the plan. He claimed that Daphne had obtained the apartment key directly from Chow Tran. Chapter 7. Justice and Resolution. Investigators arrested Daphne Wright at her Houston home. A search of her residence revealed detailed ledgers showing that she charged substantial fees, ranging from $10,000 to $40,000 for her spiritual services. Chow Tran, facing significant evidence of his involvement, agreed to cooperate with the prosecution in exchange for immunity. He testified that the family felt immense pressure to pay Daphne, believing she possessed powerful spiritual influence over their lives. He claimed his mother-in-law had suggested sacrificing herself so the family could collect the insurance money to pay the debt, though investigators remained skeptical of this explanation. On the 26th of August, 2019, Daphne Wright's trial began. Chow's testimony described her as a demanding individual who insisted on payment. The defense argued that Chow was a primary beneficiary of the insurance payout and questioned his credibility. In September 2019, the jury found Daphne Wright guilty of capital murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Bobby and Willie Guillory also faced legal consequences for their roles in the tragedy. The resolve of the investigators and the strength of the community ultimately brought the truth to light, ensuring that those who sought to exploit others were held accountable, leaving a lasting lesson about the values of honesty, family support, and the pursuit of true justice. The morning sun over Arlington, Texas, usually brought a warm, golden glow that painted the wide streets and cozy apartment complexes in shades of amber and promise. It was the 10th of June in the year 2012, a season when the summer heat was just beginning to settle over the plains of Tarrant County. For years, this city had been a sanctuary of hope, a place where families from all corners of the world came to weave their own unique threads into the grand tapestry of the American dream. Among them was a vibrant, close-knit Vietnamese community that had flourished since the late 20th century, bringing with them a rich heritage of resilience, deep-rooted traditions, and an unshakable belief in the power of hard work and family unity. On this particular Sunday morning, at exactly 7:29, the peaceful atmosphere of the neighborhood was gently interrupted by a call to the emergency. Dispatchers. The caller was 38-year-old Chow Tran, a Vietnamese immigrant who worked closely with his family. His voice, though carrying the soft, hurried cadence of someone deeply worried, was polite as he requested a welfare check on his elderly in-laws, Long Nguyen and Hong Lee. He explained to the operator that his father-in-law was in his 70s and that the family had gathered outside the apartment because things simply did not feel right. The windows to the residence were unusually open, and a quiet, heavy stillness hung over the home that normally bustled with the sounds of morning tea and family chatter. Too anxious to enter the home themselves, the family waited on the sidewalk, their hearts heavy with a quiet apprehension. Soon, the familiar blue lights of an Arlington police cruiser glided to a stop near the curb. Officer Weller, a dedicated officer with 14 years of experience, stepped out of his vehicle. He noted immediately that this was not a typical welfare check. Usually, such requests came from distant relatives or neighbors who had not seen someone for days. Here, an entire family stood together in the early morning light, their faces etched with a mixture of hope and fear. "Officer," Weller greeted the family warmly, offering a reassuring smile before heading up the steps to the apartment. He knocked firmly, calling out into quiet air, but only silence responded. Stepping through the entrance, his eyes scanned the rooms. At first glance, the apartment appeared to be in disarray, with items scattered as if a hurried search had taken place. There was a strange mix of household items out of place, but the officer remained focused on his primary mission, finding the sweet elderly couple and ensuring they were safe and sound. He checked the living room, the kitchen, and the small bathroom, finding them empty. He moved toward the master bedroom. Under the morning light filtering through the window, the room seemed quiet. Believing for a brief moment that perhaps the couple had simply gone for an early morning walk to enjoy the cool breeze, Weller turned to leave. But as he did, his flashlight caught faint smudges on the wall adjacent to a small closet. A quiet instinct, honed by over a decade of service, urged him to pause. With a gentle hand, he opened the closet door. In that quiet, cramped space, the devastating reality unfolded. The elderly couple, Long and Hong, were gone. They had been bound securely with heavy duct tape, their heads wrapped in a way that spoke of an unimaginable, silent struggle. There were clear signs of a violent encounter. Weller felt a profound wave of shock wash over him. For a moment, the veteran officer stood in absolute silence, unable to speak or even reach for his radio. The sheer contrast between the peaceful, gentle lives this couple had lived and the gravity of their end was deeply moving. When he finally gathered his thoughts, Weller stepped back into the living room and called for his supervisor and the homicide unit. Within an hour, Detective Stewart, a veteran investigator with 21 years of experience in solving the city's most complex mysteries, arrived at the scene. Stewart had seen many things in his long career, but this particular scene touched a deep chord of sorrow and determination within him. The victims were gentle, harmless souls who were deeply loved by everyone in their neighborhood. As the forensic team began their meticulous work, they discovered several unusual details scattered around the apartment. On the coffee table lay a plate with crushed prescription pills and a discarded marijuana cigarette. More peculiar still was a light blue bandana wrapped carefully around a beer bottle. left in a prominent position, as if it were a deliberate calling card. To an outsider, these clues strongly suggested the work of local street gangs, which were known to occasionally operate in the wider county. However, Detective Stewart and his team possessed a deep understanding of human behavior and criminal patterns. The scene felt almost too orchestrated, as if someone had read a manual on how to make a crime look like a random burglary gone wrong. Most street gangs did not leave such perfectly curated evidence, nor did they typically target elderly couples in such a highly personal, intensely violent manner. The extensive use of duct tape, 10 feet wrapped around long and 25 feet around, Hong, indicated a dark, deliberate intent to ensure they could not speak or survive. It was not a simple robbery. It was a targeted act. To understand why anyone would wish harm upon such a beloved couple, the detectives began to immerse themselves in the history of Long Nguyen and Hong Lee. The couple had immigrated to the United States from Vietnam in the year 2000, bringing with them their 3 children and a heart full of dreams. They settled in Arlington, a city known for its welcoming spirit and thriving Vietnamese community, which had grown beautifully since the mid-70s. Long and Hong were industrious and visionary. They established a commercial sewing business, pouring their hearts into crafting quality garments. To help bridge the language barrier and manage daily operations, they enlisted their son-in-law, Chow Tran, who spoke fluent English and became the welcoming face of the business. For nearly a decade, their dedication paid off handsomely. They secured prestigious, lucrative contracts with major commercial giants, including global entertainment brands like Disney. They were living the true American dream, providing a beautiful legacy for their children and grandchildren. Yet, as is sometimes the case with business, the tides of fortune began to shift. By the year 2011, the sewing business faced severe setbacks, ultimately losing its major contracts. As financial pressures mounted, the family felt a deep sense of worry. In many traditional Asian cultures, when faced with sudden, inexplicable misfortune or impending ruin, it is common to seek spiritual guidance. For thousands of years, people have believed in lucky gods and spiritual protectors who can help restore balance, peace, and prosperity to a home, hoping to lift what they believe to be a spiritual cloud over their business. Hong Lee and her son-in-law, Chow, searched through a local Vietnamese newspaper. There, they found an advertisement for a spiritual advisor named Daphne Wright, who operated out of Houston, some 250 miles away. The advertisement claimed that Daphne possessed a unique ability to remove powerful curses and bestow blessings of good fortune upon struggling businesses and families. Desperate to save the family legacy, Chow contacted Daphne and traveled to Houston for a consultation. Daphne performed an elaborate ritual, promising that their fortunes would soon turn around. The family felt a renewed sense of hope, believing that their hard work would once again bear fruit. However, behind the facade of spiritual healing lay a web of financial exploitation. Over the course of a year, instead of delivering the promised miracles, Daphne began to charge exorbitant fees for her services. Because the business continued to struggle, the family fell deeper into debt, not to traditional banks, but to Daphne herself. She began running their accounts on credit, and the outstanding balance quickly ballooned to an astronomical sum between $250,000 and $280,000. Unbeknownst to the family, Daphne was not a spiritual savior, but a predatory figure who expected every single penny to be paid, regardless of the family's financial ruin. As the investigation in 2012 continued, Detective Stewart received a routine call from an insurance company that instantly shifted the focus of the case. It turned out that Long and Hong had a substantial life insurance policy worth at least $1 million, and one of the primary beneficiaries was none other than Chow Tran himself. When questioned about this, Chow explained calmly that the policy was designed to ensure the sewing business could survive and support the family if either of the elders passed away. Furthermore, Chow and the rest of his family provided airtight alibis for the night of the incident, demonstrating they were all attending a family birthday party and playing cards until late in the evening. With no direct evidence linking Chow or any known suspects to crime, the case slowly began to grow cold. The DNA collected from the marijuana cigarette and the fingerprints on the duct tape did not match any profiles in the national database, which at the time did not include minors or individuals without felony records. For 2 long years, the memory of Long and Hong was kept alive only by the dedicated detectives who refused to let the case be forgotten. Then, in the autumn of the year 2015, a sudden spark of justice illuminated the darkness. A young man named Willie Guillory was arrested in Houston for an unrelated felony involving the theft of a horse. Because he was now an adult facing a felony charge, his DNA profile was entered into the national database. Within days, the system flagged a perfect match. Willie's DNA matched the biological material left on the marijuana cigarette at the crime scene in Arlington from 2012. When detectives brought the 19-year-old Willie in for questioning, they did not mention the murders immediately. Instead, they focused on his parole violations. When confronted with the scientific certainty of his DNA being present inside the apartment where the elderly couple lost their lives, Willie broke down in tears. He confessed his involvement, but insisted he was merely a pawn. He revealed that when he was 16 years old, his uncle, Bobby Guillory, had recruited him for a job in Arlington. Willie explained that on the 9th of June, 2012, they had driven to the apartment complex. His uncle possessed a key to the residence, which allowed them to enter easily and stage the scene to look like a random gang burglary. They scattered items, left the blue bandana and the beer bottle, and waited. When the sweet couple returned home, a struggle ensued. Bobby used a blunt object to subdue them, and together they bound the couple with duct tape before placing them in the closet. When asked why they would commit such a terrible act, Willie pointed directly to a woman named Daphne Wright, a friend of his uncle. Willie recounted that Daphne had approached his uncle claiming that some people owed her a massive debt, and that if they did not pay, she wanted them gone. She had promised Bobby $10,000 to carry out the deed. With this breakthrough, the police quickly moved to arrest 52-year-old Bobby Guillory at his home in Katy, Texas. Faced with the reality of the evidence, Bobby also confessed, expressing deep remorse and confirming that Daphne Wright was indeed the mastermind who had organized the entire plot. He admitted that Daphne had given him the key to the apartment, claiming she had received it directly from Chow Tran. The revelation of this deep family betrayal sent shockwaves through the investigative team. Detectives traveled to Houston to arrest Daphne Wright. A search of her home revealed detailed ledgers outlining the massive sums she charged her clients for spiritual services, confirming the existence of a nearly $300,000 debt. To secure a conviction against a mastermind, prosecutors made a difficult decision to offer Chow Tran immunity in exchange for his full, truthful testimony. During the emotional trial in August of the year 2019, Chow took the stand. He painted a vivid picture of Daphne as a manipulative, greedy figure who exerted an intense psychological hold over his family, leading them to believe she possessed immense spiritual powers that could build or destroy their lives. He claimed that his mother-in-law, Hong, had even suggested sacrificing herself so the family could collect the insurance money to satisfy the debt and protect the family from Daphne's supposed curses. Though the defense argued passionately that Chow was highly complicit and motivated by the large insurance payout, the jury ultimately focused on the evidence of the organized plot. In September of 2019, Daphne Wright was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Bobby and Willie Guillory also faced the legal consequences of their actions. Though the path to justice was long and filled with complex human emotions. The community of Arlington found solace in knowing that the truth had finally been brought to light. The memory of Long Nguyen and Hong Lee, their warmth, their dedication to their family, and their pursuit of a beautiful life, remained a lasting inspiration to all who knew them, proving that even in the face of deep shadow, the light of truth and human decency will always prevail. The summer sun was just beginning to cast its golden warmth over the city of Arlington, Texas, on the morning of June 10, 2012. To anyone passing by the quiet residential streets, it seemed like the start of another peaceful Sunday. Families were waking up, the scent of fresh coffee drifted through open windows, and the gentle hum of morning traffic whispered in the distance. Yet, beneath this calm exterior, a deep sense of unease was quietly brewing outside one particular apartment complex. The call for help. At exactly 7:29 in the morning, the silence at the emergency dispatch center was broken by a trembling voice. A 38-year-old Vietnamese immigrant named Chow Tran was on the line. His voice, heavy with anxiety, struggled to find the right words as he requested a welfare check on his elderly in-laws. Chow Tran, can you please send someone over to check on them? I am very worried. Dispatcher, can you give me their name, sir? Chow Tran, my father-in-law's name is long. His last name is spelled Nguyen. He is 70-something right now. Dispatcher, okay, sir, we are processing the request. Is there any reason you believe something is wrong? Chow Tran, oh my God, you know what? My son and my wife, they said they are looking over there right now. They say that they saw everything falling down inside. The dispatcher assured Chow that officers were on their way. Chow had initially sent his teenage son to knock on the front door. The young man had knocked repeatedly, his heart beating faster with each unanswered thud. There was no response. As more family members began to gather outside the apartment, their collective worry deepened into a tangible dread. They noticed that a window of the residence was slightly open and the blinds were askew. Too terrified to step inside themselves, they stood together on the pavement, waiting anxiously for police to arrive. The first officer on the scene. Officer Weller was the first to answer the call. As a seasoned member of the local police force, he had conducted countless welfare checks. But as he pulled up to the apartment building, his instincts told him this situation was different. An unusual gathering. The sight of an entire family standing outside the apartment at such an early hour was highly unusual. Normally, welfare checks were called in by distant relatives or concerned neighbors later in the day, not by a large, frightened group gathering at dawn. The front door was unlocked. Taking a deep breath, Officer Weller entered the apartment. The interior was in complete disarray, displaying all the classic signs of a burglary. Drawers were pulled out, belongings were scattered across the floor, and furniture was displaced. Officer Weller. I called out into quiet rooms, hoping for a voice to answer, but there was only silence. I checked the living room, the kitchen, and the bathroom. Everything was empty. The discovery in the closet. There was only one room left to check, the master bedroom. Officer Weller stepped inside, his flashlight beam cutting through the dimness. At first glance, he did not see anyone. The room was messy, but there was no immediate sign of life. He was about to turn around, thinking the elderly couple might have simply gone out for an early morning walk, when something caught his eye. On the wall next to a very small closet, there were dark hand smudges. A sudden hesitation washed over him. Every instinct warned him of what might lie behind that door, yet his duty compelled him forward. He reached out, grasped a handle, and pulled the closet door open. Inside the cramped space lay the elderly husband and wife, Long Nguyen and Hong Lu. They had been bound with duct tape, their heads and mouths heavily wrapped. It was immediately clear that they had passed away. The sheer scale of the tragedy left Officer Weller in a state of absolute shock. With 14 years of experience on the force, this was the most devastating scene he had ever encountered. He walked out of the bedroom into the living room, unable to speak or even use his radio immediately. He stood there for a long moment, gathering his composure, before finally calling for his supervisor and the crime scene investigation unit. Unraveling the scene. When the Arlington homicide investigators arrived, they were equally shaken. Detective Stewart, a veteran with 21 years in the homicide division, noted that this was one of the most intense cases of his career. ++ crime scene observations. ++ traces of struggle near the front entrance carpet. Scattered compact discs and overturned living room items. Crushed prescription pills on the coffee table. A discarded marijuana cigarette. A blue bandana wrapped tightly around a beer bottle. ++ staged evidence. Initially, the evidence seemed to point directly to a local gang. The light blue bandana wrapped around the beer bottle resembled a known calling card for certain active groups in the area. However, Detective Stewart felt a lingering skepticism. The scene appeared almost too perfectly arranged, as if someone had gone out of their way to create a specific narrative. Detective Stewart, sometimes, when a scene looks like a perfect textbook robbery, it means someone is trying very hard to make us look the other way. We began to suspect that the gang elements were deliberately staged. The legacy of Long and Hong. To understand why anyone would target this gentle couple, investigators looked into their history. Long Nguyen and Hong Lu had immigrated to the United States from Vietnam in the year 2000. Like many families who arrived after fall of Saigon, they sought a peaceful life and a bright future for their 3 children and grandchildren in Arlington, a city known for its vibrant and supportive Vietnamese community. The rise and fall of the sewing business. Upon arriving in Texas, Long and Hong established a commercial sewing business. They enlisted the help of their son-in-law, Chow Tran, who spoke fluent English, to act as the public face of the company. Chow managed contracts and communicated with clients, helping the business secure lucrative agreements, including work for major entertainment brands like Disney. By the year 2011, however, their fortune began to shift. They lost their primary contracts, and the family business entered a severe financial decline. Seeking a spiritual remedy, faced with mounting debts and the fear of bankruptcy, the family turned to traditional beliefs. In many Eastern cultures, when a household faces continuous misfortune, it is common to consult a spiritual advisor to perform rituals designed to lift curses and restore positive energy. Searching through a local Vietnamese newspaper, Chow Tran and his mother-in-law, Hong Le, found an advertisement for a spiritual advisor located 250 miles away in Houston. The advisor, a woman named Daphne Wright, claimed she possessed the ability to remove negative curses and attract good fortune. Desperate to save their business, Chow contacted Daphne and drove to her Houston home for a consultation. Daphne performed a ritual, filling the family with a renewed sense of hope. Unfortunately, this spiritual connection would mark the beginning of a much darker path. The investigation deepens. Following the autopsy at the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's office, detectives learned a heartbreaking detail. The primary cause of death was suffocation due to the immense amount of duct tape wrapped around the victims' faces. This level of violence suggested a deeply personal motive rather than a random robbery. A surprising financial discovery. A breakthrough came when Detective Stewart received a call from an insurance company. It was revealed that Long and Hong carried a substantial life insurance policy worth at least $1 million. When detectives inquired about the beneficiaries, they discovered that Chow Tran was named to receive a major portion of funds. When questioned about the policy, Chow was cooperative and provided a logical explanation. He explained that since the commercial sewing business was registered in his in-laws' names, the family wanted to ensure they had the financial stability to maintain the business and support the grandchildren if anything were to happen to the elders. Furthermore, Chow and his family members provided airtight alibis for the night of the tragedy, explaining that they had been celebrating Long's birthday at a family gathering until late in the evening. The cold case years. For a long time, the investigation hit a wall. Police collected DNA samples and fingerprints from dozens of people, including family members, neighbors, and business associates. The DNA recovered from a marijuana cigarette left at the scene did not match anyone in the national database, because the database did not contain profiles of minors or individuals without prior felony convictions. The trail went cold. For more than 2 entire years, there was no progress. The family tried to move on, the sewing business closed its doors, and the community wondered if justice would ever be served. The break in the case. The turning point arrived unexpectedly on October 12, 2015, more than 3 years after the tragedy. A curious arrest. A young man named Willie Guillory was arrested in Houston for a felony involving the theft of a horse. Because a felony conviction requires a collection of a DNA sample for the national database, Willie's profile was uploaded. Almost immediately, the system flagged a perfect match. Willie's DNA matched the genetic material left on the marijuana cigarette at the Arlington crime scene from 2012. At the time of the murders, Willie had been only 16 years old, which explained why his profile had not previously appeared in the system. On October 17, 2015, investigators brought Willie in for questioning. When presented with the scientific evidence linking him to the apartment, the young man broke down in tears and confessed. Willie Guillory, I was there and I helped, but I did not do this alone. It was my uncle, Bobby Guillory, who took me there. Willie explained that his uncle, Bobby, had instructed him to help stage the apartment to look like a gang-related burglary. They had brought the blue bandana, the beer bottle, the crushed pills, and the marijuana to mislead the police. Most importantly, Willie revealed that they had been hired to carry out the act by a woman named Daphne Wright, the spiritual advisor's true face. Following Willie's confession, police moved quickly to arrest 52-year-old Bobby Guillory at his home in Katy, Texas. On December 16th,